Okay, thank you. I'd like to call to order the meeting of the Policy and Services Committee for March 25th, 2014. And we'll begin with the roll call.
Councilmember Schmidt?
Here.
Chair Price?
Here?
Councilmember Klein?
Here.
Okay.
Councilmember Sharp? 3 present.
Okay, thank you. Public comments. Are there any members of the public who would like to speak on an item not listed on the agenda? No? Okay, thank you. And moving on to our agenda items as noticed, item number 1, which is related to the Depot Transit Center in Palo Alto. That item will be deferred. I would like to move that it's deferred to the Policy and Services Committee meeting on April 8th. If we had proceeded, Larry Klein would have had to recuse himself, and Councilmember Scharf is out of town, so we would have not had a quorum. So I'd like to make that motion that we defer item number 1 to April 8th, 2014.
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. Passes 3-0 with Councilmember Scharf absent. Okay. Should we proceed then, or wait for Jim Keene? Okay, proceed. Okay, item number 2, recommendation from the Human Relations Commission in response to City Council request to consider moving Avenidas and Palo Alto Community Child Care out of the Human Services Resource Allocation process. And if we could please have a staff report.
Good evening, Chair Price and council members. I'm Minka Vanderswag, manager of the Office of Human Services, and this is Jill Onan, and she is the chair of the Human Relations Commission. And as you mentioned, we are here this evening to respond to a request made by council last June to consider moving Avenidas and PAC out of the Human Services Resource Allocation process, known as HSRAP. I wanted to give you a quick recap of why this issue is before you this evening. At last year's budget hearing, the Finance Committee recommended an increase in funding for HSRAP agencies. The increase was given in part to decrease the impact of cuts that the HRC was recommending in order to free up funds to add 2 new agencies. The HRC was requested to return to council with a distribution recommendation. When the HRC came back to council, the recommendation that they presented included a 7.1% increase for the smaller 2-year agencies and a 1% increase for Avenidas and PAC, who have 6-year contracts. And they stated the following as their rationale. They felt that if the money was given in equal percentages to all the funding recipients, the 2 larger agencies would have received the bulk of the increase. And they also felt like PAC and Avenidas were not cut, as the smaller agencies were, to make room for the 2 new agencies. And they wanted to give the greater benefit of the increase to the agencies that had been cut. The council was not supportive of this approach and asked that all agencies be increased by 7.1%, and the HRC came back with a distribution that accomplished this. At that time, Councilmember Klein explained that PAC and Avenidas operated programs for Palo Alto that many communities operate on their own, that communities administer themselves. He suggested that PAC and Avenidas be separated from the HSRAP process, and a motion was made to bring the question of removing them from the HSRAP process to this committee. I want to give you just a short, quick history of HSRAP because I think it would be helpful to this discussion. The HSRAP process was started in 1984 at a time when there were many human services contracts with many social service agencies, and they were managed by Human Services, Planning Department, and HSRAP was a way of an approach to bring that under one umbrella. And for 2 key reasons. One was that there would be a central place to identify human service needs, and that it would set up this collaborative planning approach that used the skills and knowledge of city staff and the HRC to assess human needs. Both Avenidas and PAC were initial HISRAP recipients and have long histories with the city, and I've included those histories in your staff report. In both oral and written history about HISRAP, there are statements about a special relationship that the city has with PAC and Avenidas. So I conducted some research into past HISRAP-related staff reports to check whether a specific policy was there to codify this special relationship between the city and PAC and Avenidas. And while a specific policy was not found, in 1993, actually, we were in the same situation that we are now, in that council asked the HRC to look into whether to remove PAC and Avenidas from the HISRAP process. And the HRC reviewed it at several meetings, and they came forward with a recommendation not to do so. They felt it was difficult to draw the line between PAC and Avenidas and other agencies in terms of a special relationship, and they were concerned by removing 76% of the funding that it might influence the influence of the other 14 agencies that get HISRAP funding, and they were afraid it would endanger their funding. At the council meeting that this was presented, then Councilmember Gary Fasino spoke about the city's long history and commitment to both senior services and child care services, and he made the following statement. There were other outstanding services which had been granted city funds, but in no case did the city provide these services through the use of city staff. It was a special relationship with these two groups, but it was best not to develop language in a policy that ascertained such. His interest was not to create problems or competition between these two important agencies or any other important agencies that came before the council for funding. So therefore, at that point, no motion was approved to remove PAC and Avenidas from HISRAP or give staff any direction for any type of special relationship or special parameters in regards to future funding. And I think that will happen tonight and be able to be of assistance to staff in the future. So as far as removing agencies from HISRAP, that happened once before that I mentioned in the staff report, and that was in 2007 with Project Sentinel that administers the Palo Alto mediation program and also administers the response to a city ordinance for landlord-tenant issues. And at that point, the rationale was that their services were not really subject to a biannual review of priority of needs. And again, they were responding and providing services in relation to a city ordinance, and they should not be subject to this biannual priority of need setting and approval of funding. So that was approved at that time, and this is a similar option to be considered by you tonight as far as PAC and Avenidas. So while if PAC and Avenidas are recommended to be removed from the HISRAP process, if that is your decision, I just wanted to point out that does not remove them from the city's RFP, request for proposal process. They would still be subject to actually a new RFP process because their current RFP and their current contract with the city is under the auspices of HISRAP. So if your decision is to take them out of HISRAP, my office would do a new RFP for child care subsidy administration and senior services and invite respondents and make a decision for those contracts. And then since they're over the threshold, bring those to council for approval. So at this point, I wanted to turn it over to Chair Onan, and she'll talk a little bit about the discussion that the HRC had on this matter, the recommendation that the HRC is bringing forth to you tonight, and the reasons behind their recommendation. And after that, we would both be happy to answer any questions that you might have. And as you see, representatives, the executive directors from PAC and Avenidas are present as well.
Thank you.
Oh, good evening, council members. Thank you for having us here this evening. I did want to go through with you the process that the HRC used in passing the resolution that's included in your staff report. We heard from both Janice Shaw and Lisa Hendrickson from PAP&SC about their wish to be removed from the HISRAC program. And they voiced some very significant concerns that we are very sensitive to. They are concerned about having their funds basically cannibalized by smaller agencies. Because they're the two largest providers, they do get the lion's share, approximately 3/4 of the overall HISRAP funding. Apparently there had been some issues in the past with that happening. That hasn't happened in many years since I've been on the HRC, but we were sensitive to that concern, and we know that there is turnover on the HRC, and so I think there's a feeling of insecurity around that funding. So our discussions over the course of, I think, 3 different HRC meetings was that we would like to preserve the relationship with PAC&SC in HISRAP. We feel that it keeps the program robust, it simplifies the RFP process for staff, it keeps HISRAP more visible because those are the 2 largest and best-known agencies in the city. But at the same time, we did want to protect their funding going forward. So Vice Chair Bacchetti had drafted a resolution that we ended up passing unanimously, which basically guarantees that none of the funding for PAC and Avenidas would be cannibalized by the smaller agencies. Their funding would remain intact. And when there is an increase, they will get their proportional share. When there's a decrease or a reduction, they would also get their proportional reduction. The only slight workaround is that if there's an incremental allotment beyond the standard budget for that funding cycle, the HRC would have the discretion to reallocate as it sees fit. We felt as the commission to allocate, recommend allocation actually because you allocated. We wanted a little bit of leeway there because there are emerging needs in the community, and there may be times when we feel strongly that a certain agency or a certain group needs some additional funding. So with those incremental allocations, we did retain a little bit more control. But otherwise, I think we have put some safeguards into place that will address the needs of PAC and Avenidas, and therefore our request of you is that you allow them to, you recommend that they remain in the program. I think also overall, there's a general HRC concern that HISRAP in general is underfunded, and some of these issues or this feeling of insecurity or of competition among and between the agencies is not healthy, but it results from chronic underfunding, and the HRC would like to come back to council later this year with some requests and some additional data that we are developing around the need for additional funding there. So again, rather than vitiate the program at this level, we'd like PAC and Avenidas to bear with us and help us work with council to get through this funding crisis, if you will, and get to a point where HISRAP is once again adequately funded. We have not yet returned to pre-2008 levels, so there's still some work to be done there. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, why don't we start off and have colleagues ask questions, and then I'd like to open it up for the public to make comments if they have comments. I have no comment cards here for item number 2, so unless someone wants to submit one right now. So why don't we proceed with clarification questions?
Nope.
You have no questions? Okay, Councilmember Clyde.
Sorry to disappoint you.
Well,
We're so clear.
Okay. I had one question, a clarification question. On the issue of if the separation were to take place, just restate for me, if you would, the RFP process. You'd have to come up with another RFP process that would be used in this set of circumstances. And then once that was done, how and recommendations were made by staff, what would be the time frame for these recommendations? Would there be a different duration of an allocation, or how would that be handled?
Sure. When I checked with our budget department and our legal department, if this was to happen, this is the recommendation that they gave to me. So it would just be a new professional services contract. So there are templates for that. So it would look very much like the RFP for the HISRAP process. So with some tweaks to it, because a lot of the HISRAP process right now and the language in the RFP, speaks to, things that really wouldn't be applicable here. So It would be developing that new RFP and just issuing it out. So it's not a very complex process to issue a new RFP to do so. So, and the terms could be the same. I mean, as staff, I'm not interested. You know, we have professional services contracts, you know, can go from 3 to 6 years. And I know we've worked to have the larger agencies have the 6-year terms, and that would be something that I would look into having once again. So it would be a new RFP with much of the same documentation that they would have to turn in. Once it's submitted, it would go through Human Services for review, and then it would go straight to council, or if there's another will by this committee or the finance committee for approval, as it's over $85,000.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Do either of my colleagues want to?
But there isn't a period of, for instance, when HISRAP comes before the finance committee, the agencies come and they talk about their recommendations with and say, oh, we wish we had more, or there's not really that type of public discussion on it before it goes to council. So it's a little bit, it's really a negotiation with staff. They're offering certain, I'm in the RFP and the scope of services, I will put out the type of services that I am looking for the needs that I see that are identified in this area, and they were responding to that. Then it's a negotiation between me and the respondents of the RFP, and when the contract is negotiated.
Thank you. Okay. Councilmember Schmidt.
Thanks very much for the presentation. Very well done and clear. The material sent was helpful. I know we've had one discussion about this already. So let me give you my conclusions, and if you want to respond to them, or anyone in the audience wants to respond, I'd be delighted to hear. Human services, I guess, is not the main function of local governments. We deal with primarily things like security and safety and fire and land use and things like that. But it's impossible to live in a city without being impacted by human needs. You run into people every day who need something, and it's part of, I think, living in a local community that you want to build a healthy and prosperous community. So human services come to the fore. Now, I think there is an advantage to having a human services budget rather than break it up into little pieces, because it's the one time in the year where the attention of the council gets turned to the range of services. One of the key things about a local community is the dynamics of it, that we live in a place where demographics and social characteristics change continually, slowly, but over time they are very different. And, we are confronting human services issues today that weren't the same as they were in the past. Homeless issue has come up, meals, victims of violence, youth has been a big issue. Immigration is an issue. So, these things change over time, and it's helpful to have a focal point, I think, for the city government, the city budget, to focus on this. And the human services budget process gives us a chance on the council to step back and say, are we dealing with the dynamics of the situation? Are there obvious problems out there that we could or should be helping with? So I have found that in the budget process, it's important to be able to make a case you mentioned, we have fallen behind where we were in 2008, if you look at it as a percentage of budget. So to have a clear-cut goal for human services as a percentage of our budget, I think it's important each year to have that discussion as how does it fit vis-a-vis our total budget? How does it fit against libraries and police services and land use planning? And I think taking out of that process the two strongest players, two strongest advocates in the community, one, youth. I mean, the future of our city depends upon being able to attract young families into the community. And while we are not responsible for education, we are responsible for services that help those young families. So child care is obviously a critical component of having a future of a city, of attracting young families into town. On the other side, our demographics say the number of seniors, the share of seniors is growing rapidly, and they are reaching a stage where they are more limited in what they can do. They probably have dropped out of the labor market. And to be able to offer them community activity so that they can retain an active and important part in the community is an important element. So these two pieces of youth services and senior services are critical to a healthy city. So I guess I wouldn't like to see, as we have this discussion on our role, the city's role in human services, to take out the two most important pieces of it, but rather they be discussed as part of the deal. So the question is, what's the role of the HRC in this? And I guess we have set up a commission specifically to help us with these types of questions. How do we sort through? Are we keeping up with right dynamics? Are there issues around town we are not aware of, or missing, or that are growing in number or strength? And the advantage of the HRC is there is a group of committed citizens who are helping us with these issues, looking at it, and can come to us with their recommendations. So I see the HRC playing a meaningful and important role in this. I think from the council's point of view, the push to increase the budget is you want to make the most forceful case, and you want to have all the players in play. So I'm almost not in favor of the recommendation of the HRC, which says we'll put constraints on how we deal with things. I mean, we do want your recommendations, but I think as long as that's done in the understanding that the council is not necessarily going to agree with you or go along with the recommendations you make. I think that's one of the important dynamics is I've noticed over time that we do not always accept the HRC recommendations, but I guess I want to make the case that they are important in helping us. So where I come out on this is to support the recommendations that are in front of us. If anyone has any comments on that, but that's where I have come to.
Well, I'd actually like to respond if that's okay, unless I don't want to jump in, hijack your meeting though.
Want to go ahead?
Yeah, I think
Want to hear a comment?
No, I think I'd rather speak first.
That's fine.
Yes,
Go ahead.
please.
Why don't you, Councilmember Klein?
Well, I come to the opposite conclusion from my colleague, Mr. Sherman. I think that the process that we've evolved into is not a logical one.
I think it might be hard for people to hear you. Might have to tilt your microphone down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I want to talk about how recreation fits into this. We have very extensive recreation programs for kids and adults, and they are separately funded. They do not enter into the ISRAP type process at all. But they could. If instead of having a recreation department, we had a recreation foundation, or whatever you want to call it. And that's precisely what we did with regard to childcare and seniors, in my view. And many cities do have childcare and senior programs in the same sense that they have recreation programs. And in a very broad sense, all of these programs always compete. We always have, any city only has a fixed amount of money, and they're has to allocate it among police, fire, recreation, childcare, children's theater, land use planning, so on and so forth. So the fact that the childcare and senior services have ended up in the same bucket with these other service organizations, I think is anomalous. And I think it's misleading to include programs that really are city functions with ones where we're just making a relatively small contribution to organizations, very useful, but they're really not taking over, in a sense, taking over a city function in the same sense that PAC and Avenidas do. I also think that the HRC's proposal, I think, is well-intentioned. I think it almost creates a sort of a false advertising. Because you set up a system where the only difference it ever makes is if the city council allocates more money to the ISRAP program and doesn't identify where it wants it to go. Well, if I were ever in that situation as a council member, and I wanted to make sure that a set amount went to PAC, Avenidas, or whatever, I would put a condition on that before I voted to allocate in the budget additional money to the ISRAP program. So I don't think it gets anywhere. And my last point on this is that I understand, but disagree with the idea that having a larger budget item will cause us to think harder about how much money to allocate to ISRAP plus childcare plus seniors. I think quite to the contrary. The council would be more inclined to allocate more to what I think are the true ISRAP programs if there's a smaller amount. So I think the council will then say, oh, we're only talking right now about a couple $100,000 or whatever it amounts to. Gee, that really looks like it's inadequate. So I think that the smaller amounts that we are presently allocating are much more likely to be increased if we separate out PAC and Avenidas from the other organizations. And I think we've also set up no matter what we say in advance, we set up a false competition between the smaller organizations and PAC and Avenidas. It's interesting to see back at what Gary Pizzino and others said 20 plus years ago. I think that I read Gary correctly to say that he was worried about competition between PAC and Avenidas, which as of 2014 doesn't exist. They're perfectly aligned. I see two nodding heads out there. Of course, maybe they won't be sometime in the future, who knows. But I think that they're likely to be because of their status within the community. So, bottom line, I'm in favor of separating out the two processes, and I think the bottom line for ISRAP would be better for the smaller organizations as well.
Okay. So now it's my turn. Thank you very much for your presentation and the proposal before us. I can't speak with enough praise for all of the attention and effort and heart that goes into the work by the staff as well as the members of the HRC and all of the nonprofit organizations that provide services to members of our community. I've thought a lot about this. I was on the Child Care Task Force in the early 1990s when I first moved to town. And I believe that based on the information before me and the way I've looked at this, I would concur with Councilmember Klein. I believe that separating out the two agencies, Avenidas and PAC, there are a lot of reasons, from the HISRAP process, there are a lot of reasons why it makes sense. We're in a situation where, in this economy and looking forward, we're always going to be competing for different kinds of resources. And I feel that the Avenidas program and the PAC program, with a long history that's been very well detailed in the staff report, provide services to some of our most needy in our community, the most vulnerable populations in our community. And the HISRAP process certainly does an excellent job of dividing up limited resources to provide additional services to vulnerable populations. At this point in our history, it's very, very clear that there are a lot of people who are in significant need, who need support. And I'm actually very grateful that the whole HISRAP process was set up so many years ago to provide a process for thoughtful deliberation about the human condition and the human needs in our community. I think by separating it out, there may be an opportunity here to reduce a certain amount of angst that goes through this process. Something would be a little bit more predictable, certainly for Avenidas and PAC. And it really focuses differently the HISRAP work and deliberation in evaluation of the needs that our community has. I will say the needs assessment that's been done by HRC and the staff has been really, really commendable. But it seems to me if we don't separate these entities, that every year this scenario, we will be having a repeating scenario of the angst of some of the recipients, particularly PAC and Avenidas. I'm sure there's angst among other HISRAP recipients as well, because they need the support. They utilize these resources very effectively. And I think especially now, if we can reduce that angst a little bit, that would be very advisable. The other thing is, all of our boards and commissions are composed of people who have tremendous expertise and tremendous interest in these topics. And again, this in no way is any reflection on that commitment and that expertise that people bring. But even city councils come and go. Individuals that are very informed and very committed. Over time, there's this constant evolution. So what will happen is these debates will be repeated over and over and over and over. So I think it makes sense from a sort of a structural point of view, from an administrative point of view, from a predictability, and it still preserves and makes the work of HRC extremely important, and will continue to do that. But it also gives a little different way and different approach to funding, significant funding to two key nonprofit providers in our community. And again, I'm very, very grateful to all of the work and all of the debate that's gone on. And I wish we weren't in a position where you had to make a decision, but that's part of our job. We have to do this all the time. And these are not always easy decisions to make. And those are my comments. So here we are.
One of you two probably should make a motion.
All right. Are you willing to make a motion? Okay.
No, I move that we direct staff to come back with whatever paperwork is necessary. Well, no, excuse me. I move that we recommend to the full council to direct staff to prepare whatever is necessary to separate out PAC and Avenidas from the HISRAP process.
Second. Did you want to speak to your motion?
I think we already have, but I think Jill wanted to speak.
and we
And I
need
know
to
we're-
definitely do that. Okay, yes, thank you.
Well, I wanted to just make a
Chair
couple,
Onan.
thank you. I want to just make a couple more comments to what Councilmember Schmidt said. Thank you very much for those words. It isn't usually the job of city governments to fund these kinds of services, and we recognize that. But we have done research in other communities, and many of them do find themselves in the same position that Palo Alto is in as far as funding human needs. And I just wanted to mention again that this community is unusual in our nation in that we have such a huge disparity between the wealthy and the not wealthy in our community. And the people who are not wealthy in Palo Alto really become marginalized to the point of being invisible. And an issue that comes up with our HISRAP agencies across the board is that they're told by counties, states, private foundations, and so on, you don't need money, you're in Palo Alto, you don't have any needy people there. So it's really important that our city recognize how isolated some of the agencies are and be willing as a community to look toward the health of the entire community, which cuts across all social and economic boundaries and barriers. And the HRC really is committed to continuing to take snapshots of the total health and bring that back to you. So if you do recommend to remove these two larger agencies, I do hope that we will have your support and commitment in trying to continue to fund these smaller agencies and help them do an even better job at being that safety net that so many of our residents really need.
Thank you. Very well spoken. You did not want to make additional comments? I think I've stated all of the comments that are relevant to the topic at hand. Did you have any other comments you want to make, Councilmember Schmidt?
Yeah, just one other point. While the dollar amount Palo Alto gives to human services is limited in its nature, I think it's important to recognize that the city, by providing land or space to agencies, is making a quite sizable contribution and has a vested and long-term interest in making that work and work well. So I don't want to belittle what the city does and their contribution.
Yeah. I did want to say that I really appreciated the staff report.
Oh, thank you.
I thought it was very, you did a great job setting forth everything, and I really appreciated the history.
Oh, thank you. I think it's really good too, with a lot of the human services programs, to spend that time writing that history down to really be able to go back to it. So we spent some attention in the last year or so doing so.
Good, thank you. Okay, we have a motion before us. Ready to vote? All in favor of the motion? Aye. All opposed? Okay. Okay, we have 2 yeas, 1 nay, and 1 absent. And thank you very much. Thank you.
And this will go to the council sometime in April, I imagine, though. I don't think we have a date.
I have not set a date. I was taking it one meeting at a time.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, let me
Yes.
ask a question on that.
The budget.
We asked for the staff to come back with,
No, this goes to the council for, well, yes, it goes to the council for its direction. The motion was that the council then would direct staff to prepare whatever's necessary.
Right.
And whether this is in time for the 2014-2015 budget process, we'll have to see as,
In terms of the timing.
given everything else that we have to take up in April and May.
And that really doesn't matter because the total budget amount is the same whether it's in HISRAP, it's all in the human services, community services budget.
Yeah, so that makes sense. Okay, good, thank you very much.
Thank you for your time.
Okay. Mhm. Hi.
Good evening.
Okay, welcome. We're at item number 3. Recommendation that the Policy and Services Committee approve the updated guidelines, procedures, and selection processes for the City of Palo Alto's Coverly Artist Studio program. Welcome, and if you would please give the staff presentation.
Great, thank you. I'm Raina Halpern, Assistant Director for Community Services, overseeing arts and sciences. And as per your request, you had items when we presented in February 18th that you wanted us to come back on. There were 10 items. And what I wanted to present are 4 of them in a very quick 5-slide presentation. The 4 of them have directly to do with changes since your last review. The other 6 items or so in the staff report had to do with information you requested that I provided therein. So, first, you had asked questions about the outreach and marketing plan, and I just wanted to let you know that as of today, we have started building a list for marketing and outreach, and as of today, we have 235 outreach contacts in the following categories. Galleries, and there's 20 galleries that will go up much, much higher. Co-working spaces, robotics organizations, art class venues, public art programs, local artists, blogs, guilds and collectives, meetup groups, game developers, art supply stores, service organizations, arts festival, specific arts organizations, arts-friendly email list, event calendaring websites, local colleges and universities, et cetera, et cetera. So that's the list that we have to date, and we do expect to expand it quite a bit. Go ahead. Number 6 and 7 in your staff report. I'm sorry, I meant to say that the marketing and outreach was item 3 in your staff report. And then the next few slides have to do with 6 and 7. And it's okay, welcome. So we talked last time about the selection criteria and process, and this has just been retooled a slight bit. This is not a big difference, but I just wanted you to be able to see them. You got to read them in your staff report, so I won't go through reading them, but this is the this is the slightly revised selection criteria that the panel would use. And that would be phase 1 is the arts professionals panel would use that criteria. And then in phase 2, staff would take the score as per that criteria and go ahead and make final placements, ensuring that the mission and visions and goals of the program were being met. So specific attention paid to diversity of arts disciplines, the artist's ages, cultural approaches, and points in the career. You had asked for a new plan on ensuring a transition time as well as phasing out the incumbent artists. And we came up with a very simple plan that didn't have so much math involved as what you saw last time. And what we were looking at and proposing to you is that artists who've been there up to and including 5 years of residence would be eligible for the full 4-year term. And then it graduates down 5 years, more than 5 and less than 10, 3 years. 10 years up to 15 would be 2 years, and more than 15 years through 24 years would be 1 year. And then an update to the timeline, and this is our last slide. right? Is that the application period would open May 1st, to July 1st. July would be basic intake and review for eligibility. August would be the panel and selection decisions and process, and we would be announcing it by the selections by September 5th, right after Labor Day, and then start immediately working on contracts and insurance so that artists could start moving in as early as October 1st through November 1st. Was there one more? I think that was it. Yeah. Yes.
Okay, colleagues, do you have any questions of the presenter or questions related to the staff report? Okay, Councilmember Schmidt.
Let's see, let me just start with some questions. You revised the subsidy amount,
Yes.
estimating now $10,300. That is, how do you calculate the subsidy? What do you use for rental of the property? I know there's some controversy over how much
Right.
a room in Cumberly is worth compared to market prices.
Right. The market rate difference is between $2 and $3.50. We took a $2. We just took a $2 factor.
The lowest of your.
Yeah. And just figured it out by square footage of the blocks. Yeah.
Now, the rent they pay comes to roughly what, $5,000?
It's about $100,000 for 23 single artist studio a year.
So it's about $5,000 per artist. So they're paying 1/3 that you think the price they would get somewhere else would be.
Depending on a couple things, like depending on the square footage. You'll note in the staff report, you can see that the studio square footage ranges from 360 feet to over 1,000 square feet. And artists do pay, so artists are paying, from $500 on up. So there is a range. The other thing is that most artist studio programs do use a subsidized rate. They don't use the market rate.
Let's see, the cultural cafe was the
Yes.
question that had been discussed. And you do have a piece in here. Can you talk just a little bit about how you see that? How large a space is it? How often would it be open? Who would run it? What would go on inside?
Yes. The idea for the cultural cafe is to create a space at the Cumberly Community Center that's really animated for the arts. So right now, when you go over there, sometimes you can't find. It's not that easy. There's not signage to find. Okay, where are the artist studios and are there any artists here right now when I'm walking by? So what we want to do is create a space that's really dynamic. It would be open on a limited basis at first and then increase. And this would be a place for the community to come to really engage and participate. So be a place that you could have coffee and tea and snacks, but you could also look at the Cumberly artists' work that's up in exhibition there. We have space to sell artisanal products possibly there. We'd like to see like poetry readings, artists presenting their work. Maybe there's some workshops or classes. Maybe there's some hands-on arts activities.
How large a space is it?
About between 1,000 and 1,100 square feet.
Yeah. So I'm trying to think how many people would fit in there comfortably.
Well, these were classrooms that were for 30 to 35 kids.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm very interested in having the program be a little more interconnected with the community. And this obviously is one place where members of the community can say what's going on and see it.
Yeah.
I guess more than that, it could become a magnet for people to come, a place where artists could sell their products or make them available to the public.
Yes.
You don't have anything online. I would think part of reaching out to the community is to have an app where the artists could post some of what they're up to, what they're doing, first for people just to look at, but secondly to sell and get them interested, draw them to come to the studio. Has there been any thought or discussion of that?
I have been thinking about that there needs to be an online component. Right now, the Cubberley artists have created a wonderful website that does show their work and links to their own web pages, their own websites. But yeah, I would love to get, really grow this business and be able to increase the economic stimulation factor as well as the community engagement. Now, you did ask one question about who would run it, and right now we have $250,000 out in grant requests, and of course, you never know with grants how you're going to do and what your competition is. But if we get that, there is some funding in those budgets to help build up the cafe and hire a manager who could really help build the program.
Yeah.
And it has to be the right person who could
Yeah.
run a cafe and work with the artists. And I've been talking with a couple different people.
And you need something like parking.
Right.
So accessibility is critical. You say you're going to start slowly. Do you have any idea what that means? Weekends, half a day,
Right.
afternoon hours? What?
So if we get these grants, the plan is to have about 3 to 6 months of planning on the cultural cafe to really get it up and going, and then to start out monthly during the time of having art crawls at Cubberley. So there would be other things happening too, like live performance, films at night in the open space, temporary public art. So we would have funding to start with once a month, and then I'd like to, as quickly as possible, get it to once a week, and then for special events like workshops, artist lectures, poetry readings, performance art.
So it's not a regular space, it is a special space.
Until it can be sustainable. Yeah.
Selection process, I guess, is very important.
Yes, sir.
You want to make sure that you are getting a group that can make judgments on who would flourish in such an environment. The way I read this is there would be no staff, no members of the art commission who are on the panels. They would all be outsiders. Is that right?
What you have here under number 6 is the panel will include accomplished executive directors of nonprofit arts organizations, professors and arts educators, directors of respected commercial art galleries, and established artists. If we had an arts commissioner that also wore that hat, as long as they didn't have a conflict of interest, I think that would be acceptable.
Yeah.
But, I think...
The panel is critical, and
yes.
how you have credibility in it is an important issue. Independent and
Yes.
credible.
Mm-hmm.
One of the criteria of selection is residency in Palo Alto. How important a criteria is that? 5%, 25%?
It's minor importance. I think that if someone lives in Palo Alto and applies, they should get consideration for that because this is the City of Palo Alto's program. A smaller amount. Right now, you can see in our mix, we have about half and half residents of Palo Alto and about half who aren't. And, it's just a quandary, as Palo Alto becomes more and more expensive to live in. You have less artists living here, so.
Why don't you have one of the criteria sales in the community? So if you, through the coffee shop or through the online activities, you can say, gee, I sold 10 paintings this year. Why wouldn't that be a plus?
So the point of the program is to really support artists at different stages in their career, and for some artists and a lot of artists, selling their work is not maybe a really big part of what's happening in their artistic life, but they're producing important work that can impact the field, that can be exhibited and written about. And so I think translating, importance to the economic outcomes is not always a good criteria, but I think you address that by having artists at different points in their career.
Yeah, although I think one of the things we're trying to talk about is community, having an impact on the community. And I'm trying to think of ways of measuring that impact.
Yeah.
And inviting people in, engaging people that you live with in the community, getting them in there, create little incentives
Yeah.
to get people engaged. Okay, just a thought. One last question. On your phasing out incumbents, or are you saying that after 4 years you can apply for one more term? And is it one more term, so you're limited to 8 years?
We're still saying it's an 8-year waiting period between, if you've been there for 8 years, you wait for 8 years. On the phasing out, this would be their last time portion of a term, and then they would have to wait 8 years for all of them.
This says if you've been there more than 5 years, you can still apply for a 3-year term. So you have an 11-year max.
Okay, I'm sorry if I wasn't clear. So they're, right now, when we open it up, they would be applying for 1 4-year term, the artists, and they could apply again for another 4-year term. So that would be 8 years total. And
So you're including incumbents in this, so they have a new cap of 8 years.
They have a new cap of 1 more term, 4 years max, so that they could apply again and be placed for 1 to 4 years.
Okay. And the artists are comfortable with that incumbency role?
As far as, I think that we should, hear from the artists, but I think the feedback I've gotten is that people feel like term limits are not necessary, that normal attrition.
Yeah, at least half the residents in there now have been there over 8 years, is that right?
Over 12 years.
Yeah, so that they would be affected very dramatically, a whole slew of them right up front. Okay, those are my questions. Thank you.
Councilmember Klein?
I must have missed it. Where do you state that there'd be an 8-year hiatus?
Between terms, I am not positive. It's stated again in the staff report, but it is in the guidelines. And I can find it, I just have to get my eyeglasses.
If we're going to say it, I just want to make sure we say it.
Yes, it is said.
Well, I think that your phase out was elegant and simple. The complications we got into in our previous discussion. I think it makes a lot of sense. And I know we're going to hear people say that they don't like 10 minutes, but I haven't heard any other way of really making sure that this benefit.
Thank you so much.
Yes.
Okay, I can tell you, Karen was my eyeballs for me. Page 7, the third paragraph that starts with staff proposes modifying the residency terms for artists from 5 years to 4 years per term. Staff also proposes limiting terms to up to 2 consecutive terms. Artists must take a break for 2 terms. I'm sorry?
Excuse me, this is from the guidelines.
Yeah,
Yes.
It's not in the body of the
Yeah,
staff report, right?
I was just looking at the.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
yeah,
Sorry.
no, that makes sense.
Okay.
I had a question, I don't remember what it was. How, the one drawback I can see of the phase outs is that I think you may be in the process of conducting review panels every year for a few years, maybe for a long term. Let's say that you have a person who goes through the process and who's been there for more than 15 years, so he or she now has more than a 1 year, has only a 1 year term. Okay, so you're now gonna have a vacancy a year from now, or a year from sort of in. And is that the only person in that category, are you gonna really convene a panel and go through the whole process just for one vacancy?
So one of the things that you'll see here is the trigger for creating a alternate list. And what we would hope is that we have enough alternates, good alternates on our list that have ranked highly, but not high enough to be in the selection, that we could fill vacancies through the artists terming out, the incumbent artists turning out, and any natural attrition. And that is what the program has done for the last 24 years. It's been able to do that.
How often would you convene a panel?
Every 4 years.
Well, that's the end of that. I'm very pleased with where you are. And at the appropriate time, Gail, I'm certainly ready to move these staff recommendations.
Okay, I had one second, I have a couple of questions. Again, it's related to the incumbents, and thank you for all your comments and responding to all our inquiries from the last meeting. My question is this, and maybe or you've already stated it. How many artists currently at Cubberley have been there over 10 years?
I had the number in the first one. I think it's 11.
Okay, 11.
However, I can say that in the last month, 6 artists have turned in their notice, then they will be vacating the studio by the end of March or into April. So
6 of the, oh, 6
Six
across
of
all
the-
categories, not
yes.
just at 6, okay.
Right.
Thank you, okay. And I guess, I mean, I understand the intention in terms of, broadening the net and having, different people with different experiences, different ages, et cetera. My only concern with the incumbency, the language here regarding terms, is that the people who've been engaged as artists in this community with the most experience and wisdom over time, who've been a really, really important parts of the community, have, very narrow windows in terms of incumbency. What I'm saying is 10 to 15 years, a 2-year term option, potential, and for 15 to 24, a 1-year term. So my question is, would it be manageable in terms of reaching a variety of goals to literally have, this is really tinkering with the categories, saying at 10 years and up, you have at least a 2-year term.
That'd be fine.
Because I feel as if a 1-year term is sort of years, 6 months, a year goes so quickly, and the value and the experience of the people in those categories, and all categories, I'm not saying in all cases, but they bring a certain, kind of depth and breadth of experience that will be very useful to integrate with all the other people who are coming and going, and we are in a period of transition. I mean, Coverly, we don't know, what will Coverly evolve into in the next 5 to 10 years. So if we were to at least do that, where you have that window, that 2-year incumbency, I think it really, the 1 year to me, it just feels as if we are just saying to someone, okay, you've been here 15 to 24 years, out. I'm just not comfortable with that. And I feel that it's still, by modifying that, and it meets a lot of the goals that you have in mind. And it just feels so short and so quick. And I know many of these people have worked very hard, all the people who are in these, who have, taking, full opportunities that have been brought to them. They've worked for it, they've competed for it, they've gone through juried situations, all very, very difficult to do and very, very demanding. I think that it's not very respectful to say, in my mind, okay, 1 year, especially for people who've been there for so long, giving, art to the city, complying with all the regulations, et cetera. So I would like to propose that when we get to the motion per se, I'd like to add that as an amendment, which is to modify this one element of the guidelines. I do think that your presentation and the thoroughness of the work is very impressive, and I do appreciate all the people who've been involved, the artists, the community members who've been involved in this work. So, did you want to move forward?
I do have another question. If you-
Okay, sure. Other question? Absolutely. You have a follow-up question? Okay, so Councilmember Klein and then Councilmember Schmidt.
Can you tell us more about the 6 people who tendered their resignation?
Well, I think some of them are here, and so they might want to talk about that. But one person is bi-coastal between here and Vermont, and she's decided to move more permanently to Vermont. And as far as I understand, there's a new artist studio opening up in Redwood City, and that the other 5 artists were able to apply and get into spaces in that new studio, and which came at a really great timing. And I also just want to reinforce that there's absolutely nothing but respect on staff's part for the artists who are there, and that all we're trying to do is make sure we're being equitable.
Thank you.
Also, I still don't have any cards from members of the public here. Oh, well then, if you could bring the cards forward. Do you mind if we wait on your comment? Okay. I thought that seems very odd to me.
Yeah, we can.
I wondered.
Yeah, I thought, how could that be? Thank you. Okay. Okay. Did you, okay, I'll just take them in order here. Okay. All right. So, we would like to hear from the individuals who've submitted cards. Let's see, Mary Holzer, and then Alessa Bouchard. So you have 3 minutes.
Did you go any special
Speak.
place or just
It's
stand-
best to go near the microphone.
Got it. Okay, I'm not, is this working?
Yes,
Chair?
it's, yeah,
So, first of all, truth in advertising, I'd love to be in one of those studios. I was retired from the high-tech industry a few years ago, and I've had now the opportunity to spend time working on my art. And I am doing it in half of my garage, which is not nearly big enough to do the kind of thing that I would like to do. So, just so you know. I think that I am not the only one in my circle of friends and people that I know who take classes in Palo Alto and other places who would like to be there. In fact, a couple of them have said, oh, we're going to apply, let's try and share a studio, you know, et cetera. When I discussed this with people in my art classes and with my art teachers, they said, we have given up trying to be in those studios because the process was either so opaque or invisible in some instances that they felt that, you know, that was not an option for them. So I think that there's many experienced artists who actually are out there who would love to be having that opportunity and have not had that, you know, have not been able to break the code in some instances. So I think terms are a good thing, and I don't have any problem with that. With respect to the selection criteria, I am not 17, but I don't think that that means that as an artist I would not have an effect on the community. I live with my daughter and her 2 little children, and as a consequence of them watching me paint in my garage, both of them have been really excited about art in their classroom and have been working hard on their things, and we have a big wall in our house that has their periodic contributions of the art that they've made. So you can ask me any questions you want, but that's my comment.
thank you.
Are you talking?
Oh, yeah, yes. And Alessa Bouchard, followed by Anne McMillan, thank you.
Hi, thank you so much for all of your work, and this is great to see this proposal coming together like this. The first thing that I wanted to bring up is that I was just involved in the Cubberley Community Center Commission, where we were the special commission with the school district and the city working together to really examine Cubberley, and was really involved with interviewing my fellow artists and communicating what the program was about and the history of the program to the larger community and the commission. One of the things I wanted to bring up was that the market rate thing gets thrown around a lot, but I don't think it's very clear to the public that the city is prohibited from leasing that land for just anything. It has to serve the purpose of serving the community. So when we're talking about the market rate, I think that that's something that we really need to examine. It gets thrown around in the newspaper quite a bit, but without, I think, a full understanding that that land is specifically marked for community services. So it's not like, oh, the city's missing out on an opportunity to make money from, you know, the next Facebook that wants to rent office space. That's not what that land is dedicated for. This is why we have a community center there that has dance centers and schools, that sort of thing. So that's something that just is a pet peeve for me as a community activist. So I wanted to clarify that. I think that's relevant to our conversation. Also, the initial charge of the city to have space for artists in general, I think that it predates the Cubberley Community Center. It's something that came out of gentrification in Palo Alto in general and was brought to the attention of the council, the city council, and as you can see in the lovely history that was put forward from 1995, you know, this happened back, you know, in the 80s. I forget the date now, but in any case, that we really need to be looking at serving the long-term interests of what it. If you're looking at serving artists and creating space for studios, are you talking about emerging artists? I would love to do a thing where we artists that are already in the space help other applicants, because I think that that's it's hard for somebody to apply for the first time, putting together your slides, all that sort of thing can be really difficult. So having a program where we serve the community by introducing other artists, helping them get their applications together would help address that issue. And I think that is what I needed to say. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Ann McMillan? McMillan?
So
Okay, thank you.
Hi, thank you. Thank you. This has been a very interesting meeting. Thank you for organizing all the information, Raina. I scribbled a few quick notes. So a few things that I think need clarification in the staff proposal are that there needs to be an emphasis on valuing our skills as volunteers in a good way. I am an artist and a teacher. I don't mind cleaning up, but I don't want that to be intrinsic to the process. Like, I want the city to value my skills and to honor them and respect them as a professional. Not to say that I'm opposed to taking down the easy ups and the tables, but I would prefer to be teaching classes, having artist open studios, career days, that kind of more outreach that uses my skills and abilities. I also think that the sharing studios programs needs to be greatly clarified, because it would be very hard for me to get a bunch of friends together and for us to know how much the studio would cost each of us, what would be the conditions. The idea of evaluating the artists based on their sales, I think it would be much better to evaluate the artists based on their accomplishments. Seeing as some of our artists do, you know, groundbreaking social work, our performance art, our installation art, that does not have a market to hang over your living room couch. I mean, I happen to do that kind of art, and it makes my life easier. As to I was going to respond to the previous commenter, the opaque application process. It was opaque. I applied 6 or 7 times. I heard no 6 times, and finally I heard yes. And I think that opaque process really came from a kind of bottleneck lack of staff dedicated time. And so the kind of narrative that I'm somewhat hearing is that the artists have exploited the system to some extent. I don't think that's true. I think what has rather happened is that there has not been the resources in the city to govern the system. That's all I have to say.
Okay. Thank you. Marguerite Fletcher?
Good evening. I spoke last time this committee assembled about my disappointment in urging you not to create an end game cap. And not because it's unfair to artists, but because I believe that a longevity factor along the lines of what Gail was addressing is part of the power, a big part of the power of this program and what makes it unique and prestigious. I believe that could happen and was happening through good panel jurying who can make discernment and do a percentage of of discretion around accepting emerging artists as well as allowing the experienced artists as part of the process. I mean, I think that can be educated through a jurying process. And we are proud of the kind of mix, even though it doesn't do, it obviously doesn't impress several of you in terms of the numbers that you want to see of people utilizing the program. I'd like more consideration on the numbers of people maybe who've been affected by the long-term artists who've been there, as well as the new people who've come in. That I think that's been overlooked, and I'm sorry about it. What I do want to say on a practical level is not only have 6 people given their notice, there are at least 3 or 4 others of us, including me, who are not going to participate in the jurying process. So I believe there will be over half of the studios available. And I know already 2 and 3 from mine of the larger studios will be available for including more people. I think it's a great idea that you're advocating having some shared studio spaces where people who can only come 2 or 3 times a week. Most of us have full-time jobs. We have to work hard, and to have emerging artists perhaps share in order to make affordability. I would like to propose, but there's already a proposal on the desk, that you not have, it's not going to be necessary, number one. It's been 8 years since there was a jurying. Part of the reason that just attrition didn't work is that there hasn't been a regular jurying process either. So I wish I could propose that you not have this. I don't think it's elegant, the phasing out process. I think it's a laborious process that is unnecessary, and I'm sorry about it, because I am.
Okay, thank you. Sharon Shinen Engle?
Thank you for having this meeting, and I need to read my, my statement. I'm one of the artists who, come August, will have been at a studio at Kirberly for the past 24 years. I'm very grateful to have had a space in which to develop the work, to be with artists within a thriving center that served many other groups. I have participated in the jurying process 3 times. There was no rejurying initially, since there was a natural turnover of artists, and at various times there have been unoccupied studios. It is my observation that in the last 5 years, this program has never been stronger. This was a group of dedicated, serious, hardworking artists, fine arts artists, who focused their work and who were focused on their work and were also supportive of each other. There were other community involvements of teaching, holding group shows at City Hall, workshops for interested artists in the community. It was an inspiration to be among such artists and in a program that worked so well. Also, many of us have held other paying jobs that supported our creative endeavors and or operated on slim budgets that permitted this. These affordable studio spaces in the midst of an unaffordable and safe area was a great program for the artists, and as well as the community, for it kept the artists here in Palo Alto. The only comment I have about term limits is that it focuses on time served rather than on the quality of the work or potential work, which was the original intention of the program. I do hope that the program keeps in mind the reflective time and autonomy needed for creativity. We are all so caught up in the busyness of our lives, and the studios provided that opportunity to reflect and focus to further develop our work at a deeper level.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much for your comments, very thoughtful. We appreciate that. Okay, Councilmember Schmidt, did you have some comments or questions?
Let's see, just a couple follow-up questions. Question has been raised about juries. Suppose we have a juried panel and some of the incumbents score much higher than the new. Is there a way of taking that into account in terms of allocating space? Is there some kind of point differential that would be significant enough to say the space would be better used?
Just as a clarification, are you saying it's like the home team advantage? Is that what you're?
No, I'm saying
okay.
a juried advantage. If a jury gives scores,
Right.
and it turns out that those who have been there a long time and are capped score substantially higher than any of the new pool coming in. Are you still obligated to take in the new pool?
That's the beauty of juries, is that you can really bring these questions to them for them to deliberate. And I think that, I've run dozens or hundreds of panels, and I've always brought the problems to them, and they've always helped me figure it out. So,
Yeah, that might be something,
Yeah.
good information feedback
right.
to the council might be very helpful on something like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Other question I had was just about Coverly happens to be a space that has been utilized and available. We are in negotiations about the future of Coverly and might not be available. What happens when you make 4-year or 8-year commitments? Are we creating legal obligations that cannot be undone?
Did you want to address that? Or
Can you ask the question again? I heard legal obligations that can't be undone.
Yeah, we are going through a juried process and then making 4-year commitments to a range of artists. At some point, we're not sure what's going to happen to Coverly and the spaces that are currently there. What do we have alternatives, or are we legally obligated to find space at that rate?
Well, I'm not sure I have the answers to that. I think on the second one, those are things that we'd have to look at. I mean, you would know that better, the sense of the obligation that we have. I think it's safe to say that I wouldn't see anything, not that we can rule out every possibility, but I think it's extremely unlikely there would be any change, obviously, in this next 4-year period. So I think we're looking outward. So I think that gives us some time to formulate and make sure that everybody understands. And I think we're going to have an ongoing obligation to try to be sure that everybody's sort of informed what the future landscape looks like for Coverly, so we don't get in a situation where, and I'm sure we're not going to be in a situation where all of a sudden we're here one day and gone the next.
Good. Yeah, I just wanted to introduce the issue, but thanks for the help on that.
Councilmember Klein?
I just want to make, excuse me, a couple of comments in response to members of the public's comments. One on the fair market value of the property. One comment was that it wasn't fair to compare what the artists are paying as compared to our so-called market rent, because the city is limited to renting out for community services. And that's true. It's not really a legal requirement, but it's where we are. That's our own policy. But the comparison isn't to Facebook or some high-powered VC firm, which in all candor would not be interested in the space we have at Coverly. But we could get more money than we do now. There's a great demand, for example, from private schools for space. And I don't have any doubt that we could get more
One of the interesting factoids that our research has uncovered is this program did start at Jordan Middle School, and at that point, the policy was set to only charge for utilities and maintenance, nothing for actual rent. And so at that time, and then it quickly moved over to Cubberley, and the cost in the very early days was 33 cents a square foot for artists and 50 cents a square foot for nonprofits. That was the cost of maintenance and utilities. Now, just in FY13, our figures show just for maintenance alone, the cost was $1.97 per square foot at Cubberley. This does not count utilities.
My other very different point is setting sort of term limits. Our focus tonight, and almost everybody's been talking about the effect on people who are artists who are currently in residence. But there's a second component to it, and I want to stress that, and that is on people who are going to be starting. Somebody who is going to be a successful participant in the jurying process and becomes a first-time tenant at the end of this year, beginning of next year. That person is going to be subject to the 2-term limit. That person would have an 8-year, up to an 8-year term, assuming a success of the second panel. And I think it's important that we focus on that as well, since I think that setting forth what the rules will be going forward makes it a lot better for those people to understand what they're getting from the city and what the limitations are on that. So that to me, it's a 2-pronged thing. And actually, if I had to choose between the two, it's the second one that's really more important to me, that we have a very clear policy going forward.
Well, I'd like to move the staff recommendation regarding the updated guidelines, procedures, and selection processes with the following modification, that under the discussion of let's see, relates to the issue of the duration that incumbent artists would face. I would like the modification to be made that 10 years and up be a 2-year term, and that the effect would be that the category that that is clear that the category 15 years through 24 of 1-year term would be deleted, and there would be a modification, so it would be 10 years and up.
Second.
Okay. I think I've made a lot of my comments here. I think this is a very challenging situation. I do think we're looking at both what the experiences of the artists have been, what the contributions have been that they continue to make, and what is the approach that we're going to be taking to involve new and upcoming artists and other opportunities for people who are interested in this opportunity to be part of the artistic community. I want to thank everyone for their comments, and I want to thank the staff for working through these items. And a lot of this, of course, ultimately will be very much related to the outcomes in terms of what happens with the Cubberley campus. But it's a very vital program. It will continue to be, and we deeply appreciate the artists who have been there, who will continue to be there, and all the artwork that has been dedicated to the city of Palo Alto. And thank you very much. So did you want to make comments regarding your second?
Let's see, clarification. Are we approving the program, or are we recommending to the council?
We're recommending it to the city council.
Okay. Yeah, I support the staff. I think you've done a good job in working your way through a lot of questions and issues. I think there's a couple informal comments that were made that I'd just like to emphasize. One is that you'll be sensitive to the jury feedback and, if necessary, bring back to council any modifications that you might get from there especially on the CAP program. And two, I guess you will remain active in thinking of new and different ways of reaching out to the community so that they are aware of the valuable resource they have in the arts program.
Okay. We have a motion before us. You want to make a comment?
Yes, I do.
Okay, thank you.
Since this looks like it's going to be a 3-0 vote, we have unanimous votes go on the consent calendar. I'm not sure what happens when we have somebody who's absent, like Councilmember Sharp is tonight.
I don't know, we'll adapt it. My own sense would be that, well, I would interpret 3-0 as a unanimous vote myself, but I think we need to double check it.
Mhm. Okay.
Well, I
Thank
would
you for
say-
that question.
Yeah, I would say that we want it to be on the consent calendar.
That makes sense? Does that make sense to you? With a vote before us here?
Yeah, it might be good informally to talk to Councilmember Scharf when he gets back, and if he has no complaints,
That's good.
to move
Yeah,
ahead.
I can do that.
Yeah.
But at this point, the intention is that it would be on the consent calendar as soon as possible.
Oh, well, then, that
Right.
would leave to the manager or
Okay.
the mayor.
As soon as feasible. I won't put a date on there. Yeah, okay. Okay, with that, let's vote on the motion. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? It passes 3-0 with Councilmember Scharf absent. All right, so our next meeting of Policy and Services will be Tuesday, April 8th.
That is the date?
Yep.
Just double checking, yes, it is the 8th.
Okay, and currently starts at 7, and one of the agenda items has been deferred. If you could speak to that, our federal lobbyists. Did you want to speak to that, City Manager Keene?
Actually, yes, we have two issues, and I apologize, I don't have the tentative in front of me. I don't know if you guys don't have, I don't know if you have one.
I don't know, I gotta
what
look.
the other items are. So we were planning on having Ben Skoyak, the federal lobbyist, here for more in-depth update on matters, but their travel schedule and their sense really indicate that May would be a better time frame. We spoke with them yesterday, and so they're going to work on that, so we would move that to the May meeting. And also you might have mentioned it before I got down here from upstairs, but the item number 1 that dealt with the VTA
Yeah.
item, or do you plan to move that? to-
Yes, we have, actually, the action we took was to move it to April 8th.
Okay, great. Thanks. And
Okay.
I did, when I spoke to Lee Stanford, I told them that that's what clearly the date we would be looking at, so we should make
Okay.
sure that all the folks know that.
And I will look at the agenda, the tentative agendas, to see if there's some other things that can be advanced, and we'll go from there. So any other comments about upcoming agenda items?
Yes,
Councilmember Klein?
Speaking of our lobbyists, when are we going to have a session with our new state lobbyist?
That's on the list, I'll take a look at the tentative, yeah, where that is, yeah. Got on the development of state legislative program and strategy, got that, so.
Okay, so
Pretty soon?
is April possible, or would it?
I'm sorry, I don't have
Okay, that would be good. Councilmember Schmidt, any comments about upcoming agenda items or concerns?
Just on the state lobbyists, I know there is a month where they all plan next year's agenda. And is it August they do that? September? So it might be important that we have that discussion before.
And I don't think we necessarily have, I don't know what our practice has been, but as far as, legislative days in Sacramento, I know that that's typically the last part of April, usually the
Yeah.
22nd, 23rd.
But I don't know if we've actually formally done that. I've been associated with many associations that have done that. But, okay, so the meeting's adjourned.